Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to a special council meeting of the Township of Douro-Dummer on this August 24th, 2020 morning. Before we begin, I remind you that the open portion of this meeting today is being recorded and live streamed on the Township's YouTube channel. Now, the closed session part of the meeting, a little later on, will not be live streamed, but the remainder of the meeting will be reflected in the minutes, which are the official record of the meeting. Now, we'll be holding the meeting as though we're in the council chambers, and we'll follow all the regular policies and procedures. I ask members of council to raise your hand if you would like to speak on a matter, and I will call on you. When I call for the votes, I will call all those in favor, followed by all those opposed. And you will physically raise your hand to vote in the manner that you wish to vote. So now I'd like to call the roll. Please raise your hand and state your presence when I call your name, please. Deputy Mayor Moher. Councillor Watt.
Here.
Councillor Landsman. Councillor Watson. And our clerk, Crystal McMillan, is here on the screen as well. I'd also like to introduce staff who will be joining this open session of the meeting. Here's our temporary CAO, Martina Jade Hartwick. Martina, welcome. Our fire chief, Chuck Pedersen.
Chuck he is on a fire call right at this moment.
On a fire call. That's his number one priority. Our manager of public works, Jake Condon. Our chief building official, Brian Fawcett. Our treasurer, Darlene Heffernan. Darlene, I see you on the bottom of the screen there. Hello. And our manager of recreation facilities, Vicki Hallam. Vicki is here as well. Okay, also in attendance today, and again, the only purpose of this meeting is the one subject from WSCS Consulting, and we are proud to have Tammy Carruthers with us. Tammy, welcome. You've done an incredible amount of work over this study that we've been engaged in, and I'm going to ask you to introduce your team, if you would, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. On the line, I believe Angela Gravel has joined us. There's Angela.
Hi, Angela.
And I believe John Scorbahash is also with us today. Our other, John, are you there? I think he's there. Our other two, Dave Anderson, Jawad Kassab, and and Kelly Stilling send their regrets, passed on we'll cover their areas. So there's Good. John. Okay.
Okay, there's John. How are you, John? Good to see you. Okay, thank you very much for all those introductions. And again, a reminder, we are live on the Township's YouTube channel on this 24th day of August. So with all of council in attendance, I will officially call the meeting to order. And once again, the reason for this meeting is to have a presentation on the final report on the Township service delivery and to review the Township's organizational structure and human resources as part of the service delivery and organizational review as part of the Ontario Municipal Act. I remind members of council, if you do have any pecuniary interest, to please state that now with any of the matters that we're dealing with today. Okay, seeing no hands. The agenda that is before you, I would entertain a motion to approve that agenda, please. Mr. Moher and Councillor Landsman, all in favor? All opposed? That motion is approved. Okay, without any further to do, we are going to welcome Tammy to the podium, or the imaginary podium at least. And this is a presentation about the final service delivery review. Tammy, you are on.
Great, thank you very much, Your Worship. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see this. This was provided to council, and is on, actually, I believe is on your website as well for the public. So thanks again for having us to present the final report to you. As you know, we did provide an update on the interim earlier in the summer, and we have done additional work since then, and so we've updated the report. The detailed report, of course, is quite lengthy, so we're going to really just highlight the findings and the recommendations here today. So as I said, in terms of the agenda, we'll go over very briefly the findings. We'll actually talk about the findings as we're making the recommendations as well. And then certainly give you some time for some questions. And then of course, to wrap it up in terms of the recommended next steps for the township. So in terms of the scope, the service delivery review was, we wanted to look at things that will improve your service, cut and move towards more customer focused services, service delivery mechanisms, so how you actually deliver your service and to improve decision making. Overall, trying to find ways to reduce overall costs, particularly on processes and services, and improve the efficiency and productivity. So reducing the waste or non-value added activities in processes. You are facing probably a growth in the next little while. We certainly are seeing some movement out of the cities into the country, and that I'm seeing that here in Lanark County as well, and the proximity that Douro-Dummer has to the GTA is going to see some increased demands for you. So having some of the foundations in place now is going to put you in good stead for that movement outside of the city, or people just wanting to have more quality time and area and location for their retirement and their families. So. And then we did look at some ways where revenues could be increased to improve your fiscal sustainability and reduce vulnerability on in terms of reliance on the other levels of government and grants. We're not really sure what's going to happen after COVID. There could be some significant impacts on grants, so that's going to be a wait and see. But the more that you're sustainable on your own, the better off you will be. So in terms of the overall findings, there are many good things about the township of Douro-Dummer that should be celebrated, but also provides you with that baseline of improvements. You've been doing a lot of really good things over the last little while. Kudos to your CBO for pushing the envelope a little bit in terms of getting building permits online. You do have a very robust financial system, Microsoft Dynamics GP, that may change over time. We're seeing what Microsoft does, but it's very robust. So you've got a good foundation there. Your eScribe agenda management system you've implemented this year and really just moving forward in some of the implementation. Can't say enough about the staff. They care about working at Douro. Lots of them live and work in the same community. You've got a good recreation booking system. It's underutilized at this point, but it's very good. So again, you got a foundation. You've committed to the public works mesh system for work orders and minimum maintenance standards. You're looking at your pit, and I've been watching some of your meetings over the last little while, and you're taking a really good approach to making sure that you're making the right decisions and you have the right information to make those decisions. Your finance team has done an incredible amount of work to try to get people on pre-authorized payments and electronic funds transfers for your vendors. Really good uptake, so that's great. You got good partnerships with your other municipalities in the county. And then you've got some plans already in place for a new website. So a lot of the things we're going to talk about in terms of technology, the website is a foundation in terms of being able to provide some of those next steps. So you're on a really good path, and you got lots to celebrate of what you've achieved so far. So in terms of the findings, and these are high level. We'll highlight them a little bit more when we do the recommendations, but we've identified them in 7 key categories. So around governance and long-term planning, some work to be done there to help you in the long term and give guidance to management. The organizational structure has some areas where we think could be better utilized and the roles better defined, and really use the talent you have at the township. Technology and processes, like I said, you've got some good basis, but we're making some recommendations around some of those processes that are, a lot of them are still manual in nature. Management and performance around reporting and some practices, and ensuring that you've got good internal controls and risk management practices. Customer service and engagement. Facilities, you've got lots of facilities, some of them are aging, and you're at a critical juncture right now. And then of course asset management, with the regulations upon us very quickly to get those asset management plans updated and really ingrain asset management into everyday to work. So when we look we take a Lean Six Sigma approach to looking at processes. And what we tried to do was look at each process and try to determine where you are in the continuum. And really and you'll see one of the recommendations is that we do believe that if your staff had Lean Six Sigma training, they'll be able to push the improvement on an ongoing basis. And that's really what you want. You want an organization that's continuously striving for excellence in customer service. So we did see in terms of controlled chaos, people are getting things done, but I would say it's in lots of cases, it's due to heroics by the staff, because a lot of the processes are not documented, and people have been in place for some time. So that's we see that often, is that they know their jobs, but it's may not be documented or looked at from an overall approach. And so some of the processes that you've been looking at in terms of your building processes, certainly you're moving into a much more process-driven operation to try to streamline those. So we are seeing some of that. And really what we want to do with today and this report is to give management and council a view of where you are today, so that you understand the services that the township provides and how they provide it. So now you can start to look at long-term process sustainability. So ultimately, we want to be to a point where we're focusing on eliminating non-value added activities, reducing variation, and improving customer service. So that's what we're trying to achieve here. And really that's the path we've taken in all of these recommendations. So similarly in the recommendations, I know it's a little overwhelming. We do have 74 recommendations. Some of them are linked to each other. So, and they are, certainly you're not going to do them tomorrow. They're a long-term implementation plan, and we've tried to identify the sequencing of events that we believe we recommend that you take to make these things happen. And again, we put them in those 7 categories, and I'm going to go through them individually. So I'm just giving you this high level view at this point, but we're going to go through them sort of one by one. I'll try to not to be too fast, but there is a lot here. So we've also ranked them. I will tell you, there was probably lots more recommendations we could have made. That was, but when we evaluated them in terms of impact and effort, anything that fell in this lower quadrant on the left-hand side, we basically said, if you're not going to have that low-lying fruit, don't spend too much time on things that you're not going to find significant capacity savings. Similarly, if you've got very high effort and low impact, clearly those aren't things where you're going to be able to gain some efficiency. So we've identified where we think the effort and the impact is going to be. Certainly the bottom right-hand corner is where you're going to get the fastest, most lowest effort and highest impact in the shorter term. So some of the other areas are obviously longer term, and obviously they'll have more effort involved. So when we look at the recommendations, we've done this in the different groupings. Some of them are related to others, but we'll go through them sort of individually and allow for questions perhaps at the end of each section. So in terms of governance, that being, the council role and the guiding principles for the township, the township had undertaken a strategic plan, which was the period from 2015 to 2018, but did not continue that into the current term of council. So we do believe that should be updated and looked from a community perspective. We do think that you can do this internally. You do not need to hire a consultant unless you feel that you don't have the capacity. But your new CIO or some of the other recommendations could certainly lead this. Obviously, we're in the middle of a term of council, so we suggest perhaps you could start this in this current term from the community engagement part, and then in full look at it for the next term of council to develop those strategic plans. You'll see in the report that I took your last strategic plan and identified what I could tell had been achieved since then. And what I would recommend is that any new plan certainly have some key performance indicators, and we call them SMART, specific performance indicators. So hopefully you found that helpful, and we certainly would say that with that next round to develop a process where those goals are included in departmental goals and in business plans and specific results and financial resources put to those. When we reviewed the policies, we noted that many of your policies, you have a very comprehensive set of policies. Some of the areas we did identify that were lacking, we've identified in the appendix to the report. But what we found was the policies are a mix of policies, procedures, and process. And we would recommend that you review those policies and develop a new framework with also a review process with each term of council, to especially the key policies, and move to ensure that those policies are an oversight approach as opposed to having detailed procedures. And that's going to be really important, because you'll see with the recommendations within the SDR is that you're going to be transitioning. So you want to be able to have that flexibility to change your procedures and processes. And really that is the purview of management, to make sure that they act on your policies. So we do think you should develop a process review. It's almost a policy of policies. I know that's a little bit sounds bureaucratic, but it really is to make sure that these get reviewed and updated, because we did notice some outdated areas. We also recommend that you look at your procedural bylaw, consider a committee of the whole option so that you have some more robust discussions at those committees. I know that you do them on an ad hoc basis. We provided an appendix that went through the entire procedural bylaw and made some possible changes, basically clause by clause. So that's in your appendix as well. And also review your advisory committees on a regular basis. One thing we did note is, the municipal sector, as you know, is becoming quite complex. And we think that council needs to have some ongoing training. There should be a little bit more investment in that. A perfect example is asset management is upon us, and having some more detailed asset management training for, as an example, parliamentary procedures. So we think that that should sort of build out, and you'll see we've said the same thing about staff, is that to make a continuous improvement through training and increased knowledge transfer. Moving really more over to the clerk's area, but this obviously affects council as well, is your new eScribe software allows for workflow and better management of agendas. And we think that you should look at a long-term agenda plan whereby certain things are planned out over the year or the term, etc., so that council knows when things are coming to the forefront. And also it allows managers and staff to better plan their work. So having an annual agenda management plan would help both council and staff move through those processes, as opposed to a reactionary. And similarly, as you continue to implement your eScribe software, it's got some great features such as being able to collect all your resolutions, and be able to, much better search for resolutions on an ongoing basis. I will say there's going to be, I know I don't have specific costs in here because I don't know what the total number of resolutions you have in the past, but certainly moving forward, collecting those, and then probably looking at maybe a summer student or something like that to be able to get those resolutions in a database. This would allow a council and the community to be able to find, stuff that's happened over time. You'll notice when we talk about the budget, we also recommend that you and customer service to be looking at more real-time dashboard information for council. And I certainly can give you a couple of municipalities that you can look at that are really moving along. For example, the town of Kirkland Lake is actually using a free software right now to show their budget process. The customer service requests, if you look at the city of Oshawa, online requests, and they have dashboards that council then doesn't have to have all the details, but you can see what's happening over time with a click of a button. So these things they do take time, but they're all value for both council and community and internally as well. The next little bit, next few are really about looking at shared services. So we did wait until the county released their service delivery review because we wanted to mirror anything that they suggested around shared services. We actually have made some suggestions of additional shared services. And of course, these again are long-term view of how you could potentially work better together and achieve some synergies. So we think that in order to make this happen, of course, everybody has to buy in, but first step is to create a shared service task force that's represented by all the municipalities in the county. To start to look at ways to share services and also better serve the customers. I can point you to a couple of municipalities. So Leeds Grenville, for example, now has a shared service task force, and I believe Simcoe County is also looking at this. Some of the areas that we highlighted were on the recreation side. I'm going to talk about that: waste management, winter control, some corporate services, and fire services. And again, this is more about making sure that the customer has one source and you're only doing things one time, one place, a Lean Six Sigma concept. So there's the political side of this task force, which would obviously involve councillors, but we also think having at the management and staff level is really important. So a few of the ideas that we had was, I did look at your neighbors, and they're right in the middle of recreation master plan as well. And so how, and again, similar sizes, one of them might be a little bit bigger, but having a joint approach to recreation may help all townships give better services. And so you could potentially be looking at programming, as opposed to just facilities, and sharing some of those resources. I can point to actually the municipality I live in, Tay Valley. Our recreation master plan is shared with the town of Perth and the township of Drummond North Elmsley. And so they're seeing some really good results from that. Waste management, I will suggest that it's quite, when I look at waste management across the Peterborough County, it is quite, it would be challenging for a customer. You've got it split up between, of course, recycling, and then municipalities have their own contractors for garbage collection. I think that if the townships went together on this, you would see economies of scale, maybe move to a more common way of bag tags and limits and user pays and all of those kinds of things could potentially improve customer service as well as reduce costs. I know that the county did a waste management plan. I think it was in 2012. So it would be really looking at that in a little more collaborative way. Winter control. I'm not sure when the last time you did a complete review, but we do suggest that there may be some opportunities. Obviously, this is not something you can just do overnight. You got to look at the classes of roads, make sure that you could potentially do have some additional intermunicipal agreements with the county and neighboring municipalities, and have it so that and even when you're looking at winter control, that's not just the routes, it's also potentially in terms of equipment use, etc. as well. Shared corporate services. Well, as much as every municipality is different, they're also the same in many areas, and those are all around the corporate service side. You're a small municipality, as are your neighbors, and so to be able to get that professional service and to be able to handle additional transactions as you grow, but also maybe sharing in things like marriage license and ceremonies. I know you don't do that, but others do. So maybe there's some give and take there. Some other areas, of course, is around IT. The county has quite a large IT department. I know you looked at their services, but really looking at it more holistically as opposed to just on the typical network and support side, but looking at how could you potentially share in those services. Similar on HR, payroll, budget software. I know that the county has Questica, so is there an opportunity to share in those that software, that kind of thing. The other one to look at is a potential for countywide 311. There are municipalities looking at this, and really what that is to have one call service so that they could answer questions on behalf of the municipalities as well as the county. From a customer perspective, that will break down the barriers between the quote the upper tier, lower tier as well. So there are lots of opportunities. I would suggest that these are the kinds of things that the province are expecting municipalities to do. And so I would also suggest that if you're ahead of the curve, you'll be held in good stead at the provincial level as well. So those were really our, and similarly from fire services, looking at things and responses across. I know that Northumberland County is looking at this. Leeds Grenville is also looking at fire service countywide, so that people can, municipalities can start to look at, is there equipment sharing? Is there better service responses, dispatch, all of those things that potentially could serve the clients better over the long term. And similarly on building planning, your building, chief building official, of course, right now is quite overwhelmed with old permits. So this will take some time, but in the fullness of time, looking at, we did talk quite a bit in terms of planning services. There's definitely some opportunities there to say, to share planning services. bylaw is really quite minor right now at the township, but as you grow, looking at how you can handle bylaw services more at a multiple township basis, as an example, and sharing software and resources will help you do those types of sharing. So really, overall, you'll see that these are 3, some of them maybe 5-year processes to undertake in terms of the roadmap. Some of the stuff you can start, it'll be baby steps around your policies, handle the first ones first. And of course, getting buy-in to that shared service task force, probably you'll have to start at the county council table. But you do have some really good partnerships with your other municipalities. So kicking that off will be very important. So I think I'll start, just pause, your worship, and see if there's any specific questions before I go.
Okay, no, good, Tammy. We'll go back, take the screen off if we could, Crystal. Is there anyone with any questions so far? I know it is rather intense, but now's the time. If you have a question, please speak up. I can't see anyone.
Heather.
Your worship, I have a question.
Okay, I can't see any faces to be able to see if anyone's waving. I'm sorry, who has a question?
I do, it's Heather.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Tammy, just a question around the shared service task force. Given the tiering that we have with the upper and lower municipalities, what would you suggest be a recommended composition of such a task force? Are we talking having just management within those county partners? Are we talking management and council? It seems to be a bit of I feel like oftentimes we have our mayor and deputy mayor sitting on county councils, so we kind of rely on that partnership. So I'm just wondering what a composition for a task force could look like.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Watson. So what I've seen in other areas is that they have one of the shared task force in terms of the governance side is that they have the head of council and the CAOs are in that sort of the oversight, but then there is individual projects that are obviously involving managers from each township and perhaps staff as well. So for example, in recreation, that likely wouldn't necessarily have somebody from the county, although if they've got a community service kind of approach and they're looking across, then perhaps. And some of these might be a little bit smaller. So when in my vision around, say, the recreation master plan, you likely want to be able to do it with your very close neighbors. May not be initially a countywide kind of approach. So I think it would be an individual, but you would want a governance structure that is going to try to keep this moving forward. So.
And Tammy, if I could jump in on that concept at the county level, we indeed have initiated such a group about a year ago, I guess it was, involving the mayors and the CAOs of all the townships. Along with the county staff. It really didn't get very far for a number of reasons. But the discussion indeed was the very reasons that you are suggesting. It just seemed at the time, perhaps it wasn't ripe for any changes, but I certainly recommend that we initiate that again and try to get a new line of thinking going. But we did try that, and that's been on the county's agenda for quite a few years, actually, to do that. Just hasn't kicked in yet.
Thank you,
so, Your Worship, if I may, I have just a follow-up question on that. So what I'm hearing then, Tammy, is that you are recommending these task force or the shared service task force to be more on an ad hoc basis depending on the department or issue, as opposed to a standing joint services steering committee that would exist.
Oh, no, sorry, I meant to clarify here. Really what I was suggesting is that the shared service task force be more of a standing committee whereby these projects be identified as coming out of that. It may be that, and then on those, it could be a combination of counselors, not just the head of council, as well as managers. So hopefully that clarifies what I mean.
Yeah, I
Yes,
certainly agree with that. Yeah. Anyone else with any questions, any clarity on anything that Tammy has discussed so far before we let her move along? Seeing no hands. Tammy, I'll turn it back to you then.
Great. Thank you very much, Your Worship. Okay, so on to the organization recommendations. Our finding, I guess, well, I'll start with is that you do have, certainly from this report, as well as the some of the challenges over the past little period, is that we do think that there are some, from these recommendations, there are going to be some significant HR policy issues, as well as organizational change. And so we are recommending, as part of your structure and a change to the procedural bylaw, to create an HR committee of council. This is not intended to be a day-to-day transactional type of committee, but rather that high-level policy committee, and make some determinations, whether it be a health and safety issue, and look issues around code of conduct, and of course the organizational structure. This has been quite successful in some other jurisdictions, so that you can discuss any confidential items at that type of committee. And as we mentioned, the procedural bylaw review basically do this in concert with that. We also, one of the findings was that the CAO, now I know there's a recruitment going on, and who knows what the skill set might be. Certainly HR issues and challenges over the next, certainly, well, the past decade, and now over the next decade, as we come back from COVID and the changing workplace, HR is going to become more and more important. So your CAO needs to have some of that professional advice. I know that you've partnered with the county on some areas that may, prove to be a good linkage or partnership a longer term. They might have, for example, I know they currently use your financial system. They might have a human resource information system. So that's a possibility. Or another professional that you can call on for ongoing support. So we're saying, there's a little bit of a commitment in terms of dollars there, but this HR professional as well would support that HR committee of council. Payroll at the township, you don't have it's not a large payroll, but it is a large undertaking. And the processes, certainly we're recommending changing those processes. And once you do, you could potentially outsource the payroll processing. Again, this could be the county level. It could be a service provider that can assist and make sure that you're meeting regulatory requirements. The treasurer, your treasurer does have certifications that certainly could be pushed down to staff as well to improve that. But really, at the point in which your payroll is much more streamlined, you could be looking at a way to gain capacity by outsourcing that payroll. And pension administration is extremely complex in government, and so having someone that does that on a regular basis might be fruitful. As we mentioned just shortly ago, but when we reviewed the planning approvals processes, the clerk, your current clerk, spends anywhere from 50 to 60, 70% of their time on planning applications, which to this point hasn't necessarily been tracked at each application, and that's another one of our recommendations. But the other challenge is, the clerk is doing this without having a formalized planning background. Typically, this is borne by the developers or the applicant, and so we are suggesting that you look either to another township to share a planner, a professional planner, to help you with that, and have the applicants work with the planner and have that cost recovery. Or what other municipalities have also done is created a roster of planning consultants that the applicant can go to. That's not going to relieve some of the work in terms of preparing for committees, etc. But certainly most probably reduce about 50% of the clerk's time and reduce risk on behalf of the municipality. You'll see, obviously, with 74 recommendations, and some of which are quite high level, we do not believe that over the short term that the township has the capacity internally, without a reassignment perhaps, that you need someone that's going to oversee all these corporate projects. You've got asset management requirements over the next year and a half. A lot of the IT recommendations are related to asset management. Of course, you've got your Edwards Pit project, but you don't have really that corporate oversight. The CAO cannot really be in the weeds and making sure that these projects are working together and all of the departments are working together. Asset management is not just a finance exercise. It involves all of your departments. The implementation of your mesh program goes across the organization as well as your facilities. So we do think that you need someone that's going to be assigned at that level. There is a possibility that you could internally reallocate someone. You could look at a contract. There may be some funding for implementation of recommendations coming forward. We'll have to wait and see, I guess. So those are some of the options around that. But we do think that you need to have that corporate manager. And you'll notice later in the presentation that we would suggest that that person also hold the SDR implementation plan and change management plan. So they're moving together. The organizational structure, we have some new recommendations around the structure and focusing on the roles in particular. We'll chat about the admin roles, but also looking at the performance management in line with the recommendations for a strategic plan, building business plans and performance into each person's performance agreement, and how they contribute to the results of the organization is really important. We do believe you need some additional, at least on the interim, some additional analytical capacity in finance as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So in line with the getting some planning professional help and outsourcing that, we're suggesting that the clerk, deputy clerk roles get refocused, taking over customer service in its entirety in terms of customer service requests, website development, agenda management, community outreach and engagement, and communications. So really being able to say, and of course the statutory duties. We did note that because of the commitment to the planning applications, some of these statutory duties have fallen aside just due to capacity. Records management, if you've been down in your basement, you probably know what we're referring to there needs to be tackled, which is really quite important for municipalities to make sure that you've got good records. Also, developing some of these other dashboards and agenda management, the procedural bylaw. So that's a refocusing of those roles. Revamping your administrative roles. Right now, they are pretty generic, and some of them report to multiple managers. We're recommending a change in that structure. What we found was, because there was overlap, there was a lack of accountability at the administrative level, and very confusing, and also did not allow them to use their talent and be able to be to focus on one area. Similarly on recreation, so this is a fullness of time or a few years out, but in concert with looking at things more regionally, there's an opportunity there to look at programming oversight, so that you can increase the use of your facilities year round. And transitioning that recreational assistant to the recreation manager to a supervisor role, and really concentrating on the technical side of the facilities. Certainly the recreation manager needs to have that knowledge as well, but needs to manage the operations at the higher level. With the implementation of MESH, implementing work orders, as well as the booking implementation of the public online facility booking, that recreation manager needs to be focusing on that recreation master plan. So one of the things we did here was the challenge of part-time staff, and because they're part-time, they're not necessarily getting the technical training that they need, and then they don't necessarily come back season after season. So you do have some staff that convert from parks to public works and back again. So our suggestion is to convert those perhaps two part-time staff to full-time without and make one of them a lead hand. Now, I will tell you that our suggestion here is a typical lead hand, not necessarily the lead hand role that you have currently in public works. Usually a lead hand role of this nature, who are the people at the facility just making sure that the work orders are being managed, is usually just a slight difference in salary, not a large difference. It's a different role than what you have currently. Similarly for public works, I know you've just recently recruited for a public works manager. There's going to be a lot on that person's plate. With the asset management role and the MESH implementation, minimum maintenance standards, that really the lead hand role that you have right now, moving that into sort of what we call a roads superintendent. So really no impact in terms of cost there, but a different kind of approach to their responsibilities. Your job descriptions are still very task oriented as opposed to competencies and accountabilities. And we recommend that you, obviously part of the org structure revamp is to revamp the way your job descriptions are written, and also undertake a pay equity review. It's been quite some time since the township has done pay equity. And so it makes sense to do this at the same time to make sure that you are compliant with the Pay Equity Act. Because of this structure, certainly the structure's recommended to be changed, rather than just simply assuming that staff are going to be slotted into different places. We suggest that you do a skills inventory and do a gap analysis between the skills and the new job descriptions, and develop do a training needs assessment and an ongoing training program for the staff. What we found when we interviewed the staff is you've got some very, very highly skilled staff, and those skills are being underutilized. So you'll end up with a much higher satisfaction from staff if they are able to use those skills. And often what happens, I should say, is that people have been in positions for a long time, and we actually forget some of the skills they had when they might have come to the township. We also heard, and this is really about all planning, but this is a specific training area around customer service. So in line with a customer service representative, that person should really be able to handle a lot of the applications and be able to give more detailed public information and detailed training than they are be able to do now, and take the pressure off the building and planning staff. Pointing to some other municipalities, actually customer service staff are paramount importance. If you look at Service Caledon as an example, they know pretty well every process in the organization. So that's really what we're talking about there, and getting things documented. We also think that even the documented processes should be done by lay people as opposed to people who are really understanding of government language. So it will help you to get better information up front. And in line with our previous discussion is making sure that you've got the technical training for part-time or volunteer staff. There is a need there to increase some of that technical training as well as in fire. So obviously fire has been an area that's been mandated, so you haven't really had much choice, and you're seeing that actually in the total cost of fire. But clearly, if you have people who are trained, they will take less time to do things like inspection or basic refrigeration in facilities. And then finally, but not certainly, definitely not least important, probably most important, is everything that we're talking about today involves people. And so managing the people side of change is so important, in developing that change management strategy. And that change management strategy is really making sure that you're watching what's happening with staff and bringing them along, and so that they are supported. So in terms of the roadmap, a lot of this is fairly short term, moving into the second quarter or so. There may be areas, and the reason we've kind of revamped this up is that it is these roles that are going to help you with all of the other recommendations in this SDR. So at that point, I'll just pause, your worship, in case there's any organizational questions.
Okay, Tammy, thank you. I'll need to see the screen again if I can, Crystal. Is there anyone else would like to make any kind of a comment on what we've heard in this phase? Go ahead, Carl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tammy, I wonder if you could give us more details about the experience that would be required for a project manager. My experience with project managers, it's a unique skill that could almost fit into any industry. They wouldn't necessarily have to have municipal experience. They're more experienced on process, timelines, organization, etc. Would you agree with that statement, or have you got more details there that you would ask or be able to provide to us about what the project manager skills should be?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor Moore. I totally agree with you. As you probably know, I am a project management professional, and I go into places that I don't know anything about anything. So no, you do need the skill set that you need is to be able to manage projects, manage relationships. And so, you do have skilled people at the township that can provide the technical information. You need somebody that's really going to be able to build those relationships. And so asset management, understanding who you can go to is an important piece. There's lots of training that someone can take around asset management. Same thing on the technical or IT side. You certainly can, you don't have to be an MCSC, a Microsoft certified to be an IT, have enough knowledge to manage an IT project. So yeah, I totally agree with you there.
Anybody else? Did you have a follow-up, Carl, before I go to Tom?
New subject.
Okay, no, go ahead then, and then Tom.
Just on the details, and I haven't been through the detail report, the 300-page document, but I plan to get through it. I guess on the Parks and Rec, you're basically suggesting that our 2 community centers, we have recommending 4 full-time employees. 3 out of the 4 would be giving direction from time to time. I'm just having trouble understanding that, why. Maybe there's more details that I haven't heard or don't understand, but like there's got to be a majority of people to do the work. But I could perhaps talk in more detail in caucus.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Actually, it's only converting current 2 part-timers that are currently working over 900 hours a year already. And then they're moving into the public works area as an example. It might not be those people. But when I say a lead hand role is really somebody that in most municipalities, a lead hand role is usually only about $1.50 an hour difference, not the role that you have necessarily called a lead hand right now. And really what they are is they're in charge of the work order, so that the supervisor, who can't be in every place all the time, is still being able to delegate that this person is responsible. So I hope that clarifies what I'm suggesting here. But
Tammy, if I can just interrupt, with these things, there definitely is a financial impact with
yes.
With benefits, etc. for full time. Yeah.
Yes, there is, but I tried to also show what the benefit was in terms of reduced training and potential recruitment time of people that leave you and don't come back.
Good point. Councillor Watt, go ahead.
Yeah, no, Tammy, thank you very much. So far, so good. I just want to touch base on the planning of that, which has been one of my pet concerns for quite a long time, and I do appreciate what you've come back with on that, and given us options of which way we can go. I know we do have professional planners in the township, so going, and this is just my thought, but going the route of having a list for people, stuff like that, it promotes more income into our township, and it gives people in our township jobs, stuff like that, which I really like. And as same as the HR recruitment. I mean, there's maybe someone in our township that does that type thing, whatever. And the more we can support our local people and get the economy back rolling in our own township, the better. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, I do like that model as well.
Okay, anybody else? Seeing no hands, continue then. Good, Tammy.
Thank you. Okay, on to probably the most intense part. I'll try to be not too technical here, but the reason I put technology and process together is a lot of the process improvements are going to come from technology investments. And I will tell you that many of these are in place in other municipalities that you can look at, but also some new stuff as well. But first and foremost, what we found was that the township has had a very fragmented approach to IT procurement and implementation. And so in line with your strategic plan, we do believe you need an IT strategy that's going to be longer term. In the short term, we would suggest that you develop an IT strategy that's going to integrate your current systems. You have lots of great systems, but they're not speaking to each other. And so they're actually not helping you. They're, to some degree, they're hindering you. They're actually adding time and cost to your processes. So for example, even with the building permit system, it's not integrated with the Great Plains financial system. Booking is not, which is your recreation system, is not integrated with Great Plains. And you'll see in the report that the amount of accounts receivable in one system doesn't equal the other system at any given time. And so we do think that you should be looking at a strategy to integrate what you have, and then obviously making sure that anything on from now on is procured at the corporate level. So it should be part of the management meeting agenda every meeting to talk about IT and make sure that everybody's on the same page. And so of course you're just about to implement mesh. When I looked at the procurement process, it wasn't specifically identified that it was going to be integrated with Great Plains, so a county-wide approach. The other thing I would say is there's a real huge opportunity here to work with your other municipalities. Some of them have the same products, and unfortunately, you know, the investment was made before really looking necessarily across the organization. Because, for example, some products will allow you to buy one product and just increase the licenses, which is still less expensive than every municipality buying the same software. So, and a perfect example would be an agenda management software. You'll notice if you want to go on the County of Haliburton, they actually bought their agenda management system at the county level, and then they just put every municipality underneath that agenda management system. So it saved them a significant amount of money. So those are things that we, you really wanted to step back and say, how can we share? In the interim, so one of the things we did here was your current provider, which does, certainly manages your network fine. The IT help desk services have not been well received. They are right now funneling through one person, but they're really not a help desk. There's no ticketing system, and there isn't the follow-up. So in the interim, perhaps adding the ticket system to your current contract, but as part of your IT strategy, maybe looking at other opportunities such as using the county's IT service. If you want to look at, I certainly, as the county treasurer in Lanark, we actually implemented that back in 2006. So all the municipalities were serviced by the county at a lot cheaper amounts of money. So the next big one I would say is, and this is where you're going to get the most capacity and customer service, is to launch or purchase and launch what's called Virtual City Hall. It is a product that's already built by your provider for your financial system, and it allows for online access for your customers to apply, review, pay for all their services. And this is why integration is so important, because if you have everything integrated into your Great Plains software, they would be able to see every single thing that the customer has on their account. And so right now you have many customer databases that would have to be integrated into one. So for example, your Book King customer database doesn't necessarily match your Great Plains database. There's some work there. But this is where you can move to paperless notifications, paperless bills, huge amounts of savings that are going to be realized through this. And even if they come to the counter, typically what municipalities have done is had a kiosk and they've walked people through. So I'm trying to address, the challenge of people that aren't necessarily as tech savvy, but at least then they'll get a statement of account for all of their transactions. In terms of the next category is really about digitizing, improving, and documenting your processes. What we found was most of your processes were not documented. And so to walk into, if you've got new staff, they don't have a playbook. And so we think that internally, creating a Lean Six Sigma process improvement team to make sure all of the departments are working together. And one of the first ones I would suggest as a project is to do a 5S or a cleanup of the operations building. Now I understand during COVID that's actually some of that's been done. So, but that was just an example to take on some little projects where people are working together and staff are involved in the change. So this would obviously need a bit of training, but it really would change. It's part of the change management strategy so that they feel they're involved in the changes. So currently, in terms of your customer complaint system, you currently have only complaints tracked, and really they're bylaw complaints. We're recommending you looking at a customer service approach And this will drive your work orders even potentially in mesh. So it could push to those work orders. And this will allow people to make their own requests online, and they can get follow-ups without staff having to get back to them. And as council, you can track these as well. And there's some pretty low cost options, like for example, Access E11, that you can look at that are really robust, have GIS attached to them so you can see where the problems are. It also helps for long-term planning, and it helps you to develop your procedures and your public information, because the questions that are coming in as they're tracked are telling you something. We also suggest, actually, even with on the customer side, is to integrate booking into obviously the public site, but also allow them to book appointments with the staff. And especially following COVID now, obviously we don't want lots of people congregating in Township Hall. And so booking, really, it doesn't matter what it is. It's a facility booking or person booking. So you could actually have people book appointments, whether it be for commissioning documents, planning applications, so that people can actually make sure that they're available. It's if you look at the city of Mississauga, this is one of the things that they've done. And so now they know when people are going to be in the office, and they can have the right staff available at the right time. So along the same lines is around tax policies and procedures. We certainly believe that this could be better documented so that someone can walk in and do that, and move to electronic send e-notices and accounts receivable notices. On payroll, so payroll, your payroll system, our processes are quite complex, and also in the fire service. So we suggest first of all, to review the system and the processes, and implement as part of your mesh and your Fire Pro to have people enter their own time. Right now, they're all done on spreadsheets. They're entered about 3 times with lots of paper and effort on the part of managers, and move to e-pay stubs that basically go out without any handling. Again, huge amount of savings for staff and time. Next is around inventory policies. Again, this is an area that was identified as being challenging, both internally and also at year end. And so looking at integration and using some of the current systems, including Great Plains, will help you on an inventory. That's really part of your 5S project as well, is to have proper inventory systems, both for fuel, for parts, salt and sand as well. We reviewed your procurement policy, and we do believe it needs to be updated. There is possibly some areas around trade agreements you should be looking at. In terms of the actual, I guess, professional services around purchasing, perhaps you want to partner with the county for more complex areas. And I know you already do some joint bidding, so it makes sense. And having procurement policies that are aligned between municipalities is also a best practice. So right now, really you're a reactive approach. You do RFPs. They're all done by hand or by manually and sent out individually. There are electronic bidding software. Pretty well the vendors pay for this, and it tracks all of your addendums and all of the bids electronically. It manages those processes. And so that's an area as well. But in line with your procurement changes, we suggest that you implement purchase orders. This will improve your budget forecasting, and will also allow you to see the liabilities as they're moving forward. So it'll have an encumbrance against your budget. And it also allows you three-way matching. And in GP, you have complete paperless workflow processes. So this can all be done internally and reduce the amount of paper you're dealing with as well. We really discussed this project manager already. Having this corporate approach to asset management is very important. You do have a contract with Public Sector Digest to assist you, and they will definitely do it from their perspective. What you've got to make sure is that corporate manager is is working with all the departments to integrate asset management in life cycle costing and daily activities. PSD will give you the ideas in terms of what that looks like, making it happen and implementing it as people are working on assets, and work orders that are attached to assets are going to start to get you to understand the life cycle costs of your assets, and make it not an add-on, but something that you're doing every day. So your CBO has been very progressive. He was out of the gate before a lot of software programs were developed for building permit online. What we would suggest is at this point, before you invest further money, is to start to look at an all-inclusive application process. Recently, for example, Public Sector Digest has released their building permits online. They're already integrated with your MPAC. They've done integrations with financial systems. They have markups, those kinds of things. There are probably about maybe 10 to 20 options out there now. We did a review on behalf of the City of Markham. So like I said, great initiative by your building department. But before you spend too much more money, just doing an assessment, I think, would be important at this point. On to a topic that's not really interesting to many, but so important, is around records management. Because the clerk has not been able to devote much time to this, there's a challenge around TOMRIMS and making sure all documents are filed in accordance with TOMRIMS, but there's some training needed. And we do believe that you need to look at some kind of document management system that's integrated with your financial system, so that you only have things filed one place, one time. This is going to be a fairly large undertaking, but what I suggest is bite off a little bit at a time. Start off with getting the processes in place, moving forward for every document that you create in the go forward scenario, and then look at a strategy for the historical documents as a different project. Certainly at Lanark County, that's how we handled it. We hired summer students, and we had them over a 3-year period digitizing the documents, it will take some time, but you do certainly have a lot of documents in your basement, so they need to be so that people aren't spending time looking for stuff. It's important. I don't even need to really tell you this one, because your fire chief was out of the gates and has moved your burn permits online, and I think it's just about up and running if it's not already. So so good on the chief for that. In terms of the mesh implementation, so this is really the software is one thing, process is another. So I can't stress this enough. Every successful implementation of every software I've ever seen has been taken by 80% planning, 20% doing. So in other words, plan it out, get it documented, make sure that people are properly trained, and the training is updated on a regular basis, and people are held accountable for the new process. Because what happens often is that people fall back to the way they did things before, and all of a sudden this implementation has not been successful. So I can't say it enough. Certainly moving to some improved financial reporting. We're going to talk a little more about that. In order to make mesh, though, work and the integration work, there is a little bit of work that needs to be done up front in your Great Plains system around job costing and fixed asset numbering. We're talking probably about 5 days worth of work to get that cleaned up. And then of course, mesh is really going to allow you to digitize your minimum maintenance standards. So being able to track those standards and your vehicle requirements, operator requirements. So eliminating paper. Right now, you've got a lot of paper, all of that minimum maintenance and grading and all of it, or a bunch, it's all done on paper. Heaven help you if you had a fire or something like that, because those things would be gone. So having those digitized and real time is really important. And we do think we spent quite a bit of time with Vicki and her team on booking, and as well as with the vendor. And you're utilizing probably only about 10% of the module, at least at the time we looked at it. And so it really actually needs to be re-implemented to make sure that the setup is done to make it easy to use. And then look at the public online facility booking. So allowing people to see what's free, what's on. You know, if someone wants to go to I don't know, a pickleball event or whatever it happens to be, yoga, if it's on your calendar, people will say, hey, I'd love to go to that. And then you can do things like create packages, whether it be weddings or all those kinds of things once you've done that. And the other big part here is having an integration with Diamond GP so that the finances are pushing out to Diamond, and finance always knows exactly how much is owed to the township and can undertake those collections. We also noted the contracts haven't been necessarily reviewed, and accounts receivable policies really should move to pay before you play. Large groups, typically what we tell people is they are to pay monthly in advance so that you do not end up with accounts receivable. And then have payment cards, looking at credit card payments. This may require a fee bylaw adjustment, that's fine. Most municipalities have moved to credit card and the fees have been adjusted accordingly. So, this is both a process as well as an organizational thing, but really moving accounts receivable to finance so they can send out a collection information and statements to residents for all the things that they owe the township, not just for recreational purposes. And moving to mobile technology, you do have it in some areas, such as building and bylaw, but mesh really is going to require that you have access in the field. This scares some people because, of course, this is going to be a process thing. It also, you know, worry about things like data costs and stuff like that. Most of these products actually don't necessarily require you to have data that once you get back to the office, you download the information when you go back to your office. So it's all, I mean, that limits a few things like having GIS tracking where you are and those kinds of things. But I know you have GPS in your vehicles. So, but mobile technology, of course, is where we're at. But think about if people are entering their information in the field, they're not going back to the office and re-entering them in another place, or a manager entering them in another place. So there are significant savings from that perspective, and you have real-time information. And then, as I said, expanding the use of Diamond. So Diamond GP is very, very powerful. And what I witnessed was that you probably are only using about 10% of the functionality. There's a lot of areas, certainly smart lists in terms of reporting, bank reconciliations, the integrations, document management, workflows, and e-services are all areas that could significantly improve the processes and reduce time and cost. So I know that's a lot to take in. Some of them are related, but and it will require obviously some investment. We'll talk about the investments after, but it does take, the investments are going to be worth the time. It will take about 2 to 3 years to do many of these things. Some of them are already underway. So I'm going to pause at this point and ask your worship if there's any questions on this.
Okay, thank you, Tammy. And I'm going to kind of interrupt the proceedings here. This is a great session. I am going to have to turn the chair over to Deputy Mayor Moher. I do have a very important county meeting to be at in just a couple of minutes, and I apologize for that, but I just can't get out of that. I will be watching the replay on the YouTube channel to get myself up to date. But Tammy, there is one thing that I wanted to make sure we're clear on before I go, and that is about the recommendation for an implementation committee. It's going to be a very involved process. I can only imagine. So I guess what we're suggesting, and I hope you're in agreement, that we do produce a terms of reference for this committee so that people know what they're getting into. And then we'll ask members of council and staff who might volunteer to be on it so that we get a real good cross section. So if we can kind of agree to that, I think we can move forward. So your thoughts on that, Tammy, before I go?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Yes, that's exactly what I would suggest, is that you create new terms of reference for a service delivery review implementation committee. We would hate to see it fall off the radar. And so we believe that, and perhaps this is probably a 2-year committee until the next term of council, perhaps. And yes, I would encourage also having, managers involved, and managers and staff involved in that as well, so that they feel that they're part of the solutions.
Okay, no, that is great. I will then at exactly 11:24 turn the chair over to Mr. Moher with my apologies, and I will catch up on the remainder of the meeting. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Any further questions regarding the section we've just completed? No? And Tammy, I guess we can continue.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm a little surprised there's no comment. I know there's a lot there, so hopefully we've been relatively clear, I guess. Okay, so in terms of management and performance recommendations, our next area. So first and foremost, what I would say is that when we reviewed your budget process, which is really one of the most next to strategic planning, how you fund it is the next most important thing. And so when we reviewed the budget process, we thought we found that it was, first of all, it hasn't moved to a longer term approach. And also the department heads are not held necessarily in the same kind of accountability framework that we have seen. So we would like to see department heads develop and present their own budgets and move to a business planning approach. So in other words, it's almost like a report card on what the achievements have been, what they're planning to do with the money, and what are the performance indicators that they're going to report to council. And have the treasurer be that obviously providing the guidance and the guidance materials and managing the process and looking at long-term financial planning. So many municipalities have moved to multi-year budgeting. It is allowed in the Municipal Act. And what that does is it actually reduces the amount of time you spend on each annual budget. And you have and also what you can do with those is now integrate the costs, the operating costs of all of your capital decisions as well. In line with that is we do one of the, although Dynamics GP, Great Plains, your financial system, is a great system for reporting historical information. It does not have a good budget module. It does not allow for version easy in terms of developing a budget book with projects and justification around those projects. And so what we're recommending is you look at a budgeting software that reads your information and can report on it. The other challenge with GP is that the reporting is although can be very good, you need to have really good knowledge of databases to make them work in a lot of cases. So a lot of these budget softwares that are out there now read the information, and managers will have real-time access, but don't have to be in your financial system, which of course creates risk. So I know that the county's using Questica, or they have used it. That is one of them. There's also one called FMW through Public Sector Digest. And the nice thing about these, certainly Questica as an example, is that it has a transparency module that allows both the public and council to see real-time access. It also, as I said, solves the multiple versions and issues that happen with Excel spreadsheets. So that is a recommendation so that you can transform that budget process. We talked about this. I don't need to spend too much time, but the Recreation Master Plan, really looking at it perhaps from a joint perspective might change things. But even if you don't, just updating where you are with some performance indicators and having that report back to council on a regular basis, including utilization rates, any reduction or subsidies that are given. Those should all be part of that, as well as achievements around the facilities itself. Internal controls and risk management. There are some financial policies in place. We provided a full range of what financial services policies should be in place. We would suggest that a financial control policy which aligns with your delegation of accountability be developed first. And certainly there are samples out there. And secondly, the next one in line with your asset management plan is to have a reserve policy. So this is really setting the stage, and really the treasurer as the controller, having those policies in place are very, very important. Implementing the electronic bank reconciliation module will reduce some of the risk around that and increase or reduce the amount of time. But this is probably, bank reconciliations it's probably the #1 control that any organization can have. And this will allow you to be able to do this in a much more automated fashion and more quickly close off your bank reconciliations. Moving insurance and procurement, sort of an oversight to finance insurance right now is done at the CAO level. That's a little unusual. We usually say it should be in line with your TCA or your tangible capital assets. Every year should be updated so you can make sure that your insurance is updated as well as your risk assessment. And we mentioned this a little bit, but really centralizing accounts receivable and developing a corporate accounts receivable policy that goes across all departments. This shouldn't be individually managed. The next area is around fee studies. You have recently looked at your fees, but they're not based on cost. And so we do suggest that you start tracking time. So for example, in planning applications, building applications, and start to look at a true fee study to make sure that you understand how much things actually cost, and then making a determination of if there are going to be subsidies, it should be a policy as opposed to an automatic that it's reduced or below cost. Planning is one area. In conjunction with this, we do suggest that you look seriously at your deposits and your securities around planning applications. They are very low. If there was any damage to township roads, the securities would not cover those costs. And that should be in concert with your fee study. Similarly, on other areas, fees are not necessarily recoverable. Building is now, but certainly being able to track those costs. The challenge in building is, of course, you've now got some old permits that are still open. I think they're down to about 600. There were 700 when we looked. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge. But again, with recreation, if your fees are going to be below cost, then you should really, one, know that, and two, determine what the fees are going to be, and then perhaps look at more of a subsidy approach for people that are maybe underprivileged. That's a fairly typical thing that municipalities do, so that they're not subsidizing all patrons, but only on some cases. Of course, having fees that are similar to your neighbors is also a good thing. Some people think, well, we can create some competition if we have lower fees, but that means that you're also putting it on your taxpayers. So it's always a really important thing to be looking at. It was when we reviewed your advertising revenues, particularly at the community centers, they were almost non-existent, as well as donation programs. It's not unusual for municipalities to have a pretty robust advertising program. And same thing with donation programs. If people really love your community centers, you could start to look at things like if there's specific equipment that you need to buy, to look at ways to do donations. And of course, as a municipality, you are a registered charity, so you can issue donation receipts. Advertising, we finished a service delivery review not that long ago, and a municipality of the same size as you is generating between $18,000 to $20,000 a year in advertising alone. So we think that you could definitely do that. Now, of course, COVID might have an impact, because of course we've had some challenges there, but certainly something to look forward in the future. So changing the fee structure, so including deposits for building. The challenge that we heard, and I was kind of surprised actually, is that the building department does not collect deposits. You could spend a whole bunch of time on that building application, and then they don't bother proceeding, and yet there's been no fee collected. So there's looking at deposits on an application basis is very good. And as I mentioned, increasing securities for some of your planning applications would be advisable. And then on the fire side of things, looking at a potential revenue recovery through third-party programs. I understand there's some third-party services that can help manage these fire claims. In terms of the roadmap, we do believe that you can start modernizing your budget processes for 2021. Actually, it is August. Starting the new budget process should be happening pretty soon. Looking at budget software, like I said, I would reach out to the county. That would be my first recommendation, to see what they're planning to do with their Questica application. And looking obviously for next year from a procurement perspective. Some of these other areas are going to take a year or maybe more. Some areas are pretty simple to move. Certainly start tracking time on your applications pretty well now would be helpful. The reason that I'm suggesting not to do a fee study yet is you need to have that time. If you got a consultant to do it, they would ask you how much it costs by step. So I'm suggesting that you undertake that before you actually look at the fees. And then with building code services, we're going to talk by tracking the time and looking at your fees, you might be able to be in a better position to sell those services, as we talked about around shared services. So with that, I'll I'll pause, Deputy Mayor, and see if there's any questions around the performance side of things.
Okay. Thank you, Crystal. Any questions? Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question with respect to time tracking, and not just necessarily in this particular segment that you spoke to, but just across the recommendations. Are there any concerns that time tracking may create challenges with it being used as a productivity measure for staff in terms of their performance and performance review and identifying staff utilization rates? I mean, I see that as a tool that we could use to, ensure that productivity is high and where it should be. But I'm also wondering if there are some benchmarks that we can not just hold staff accountable to, but also make sure that we are taking the amount of time necessary to complete some of these tasks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Watson. So most municipalities do track their time against most jobs as it is. I can personally tell you that we were implemented it in 2003 at the County of Lanark. And it isn't intended to be, from a Lean Six Sigma perspective, what it's intended to do is to be able to map out your processes and find the non-value added activities. Most of the time what we find is people say, oh my God, this has taken me forever to do this. And what they find is when you map those processes out, now you're going to see, you might see variation, one person doing something one way versus another, that they might be able to find some synergies about. And two, there might be significant areas where you just don't need to be doing those steps at all, and there could be capacity to do the more important work. So I turn it around to be a more positive thing. And if you have your staff trained in Lean and, sort of promote it that way, I think there's less challenge in terms of that. And it should not be held that way. It's really intended to seek to understand so that you can make improvements. The thing about tracking time is that you're also in a position then to properly cost your services. Without that, you don't know how much it's actually costing you. So, for example, in the mesh system, my understanding, and other online systems like that, the staff member is able to enter both their time, the equipment that they're using for that particular job, the materials that they're using for the job. And so it's entered one time. So, and then it gets pushed up so that managers can just approve the time, as opposed to right now, they're still doing all of that. So really what we're saying is we're going to, eliminate some of the manual work that they're doing so that they can do it much more efficiently. I don't think in terms of from the planning and the building side, certainly the conversations we had with the staff is they said, yeah, we should be doing that because we got to know how much time are we actually taking. And not only that, this is going to give council so much more information. If you were to say, hey, we're looking at these fees and look at how much time this is taking. The time could be, certainly from just unclear documentation. There's all kinds of reasons why that might occur.
Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Watson or Lensman. You need to be unmuted. There you go.
Thank you. My question, obviously, to Tammy relates to policies and procedures. You have referred to policies and procedures throughout the whole report, which, by the way, is a terrific report. I'm just wondering, where is the best source for some of these? Because we have, on a number of occasions, taken policies or procedures from different municipalities and modified them to our standards. And if they're not considered to be thorough or correctly prepared, where do you see a source for this?
So I can probably point, what we did in the appendix is we actually transformed one of yours.
Yes.
I wouldn't necessarily say that what we wanted to do, what we were doing there was just to demonstrate the difference between a policy and a procedure, try to get those steps out of there.
Right.
But we certainly can point you to some municipalities that have been pretty effective around that. Obviously, procedures, they often do not share those because they are internal. But I certainly will commit to provide a framework that you could use, that I've seen as terms of that. We've done a significant amount of work in this area.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to have the different parts of the policy defined is really, really important, and having a standard approach across the organization.
Thank you.
Tammy, any further questions? What's the opinion of the group? Want to take a 5-minute break and then keep going, or should we keep going? Any comments?
Doesn't matter.
Okay. Well, we keep going till another section or two. Go ahead, Tammy.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Actually, the next part should be a little bit faster because they're not as detailed. So, okay. So in terms of customer service, really what we're saying here, and we've already addressed this, is to look at an online customer request complaints online, and as opposed to just complaints that are moved up the ladder. So that you can start to understand what the kinds of issues you have and have the documentation over a period of time. So we talked about that already. In terms of developing a community engagement strategies, is looking at ways to communicate with the public around a variety of areas. Social media, as much as some people dislike it, I'm really not a big fan of it myself, I must say, but it is the way of today, unfortunately, in some ways. In other ways, it's very, very effective to get messages out. But coming up with a strategy around that, and I would say the very first thing to do is, as we mentioned, is launching that strategic planning piece from the customer perspective. And this has really got to be listening to what people need, and based on your demographics, and changing demographics of how they like to be communicated with. And really looking at your online resources and moving them to a little more, less government ease, because people cannot understand how we speak a lot of times. They don't understand the different levels of government. And we put things out, and I mean, I worked for the government for a long time, so I'm probably I could be one of the worst ones, but having somebody like a student write your stuff for the online might be the best option, because they don't know necessarily anything about your organization, and they're going to look at it from their perspective, and that's really what you want to try to do. And then, of course, you're updating your website. And when all I can say is look at it from the customer's perspective, not from the government perspective. They don't understand our departments and our structures and all that stuff. We want to create this website to be in line with how the customer would look for things, not necessarily how we would structure them. And I can certainly point to a few that are quite well done. Actually, the Township of Scugog's site is quite good as an example. So that's really that one. I'm not sure if there's any, this is customer relations. We've talked about most of them already, but if there's anything else.
Thank you, Tammy. Any questions?
Carl, just a quick one, please. Yeah, just a quick one, Tammy. The social media part, we've toyed with that one quite a bit, as most councillors know. And we do the Twitter, we do have our website and stuff. And, I guess the Facebook's come up a few times, stuff like that. But it's one of those things that it just turns into a pissy match for lack of better words, and I apologize for that. But back and forth, and then the staff time on it to reply to all these different things, and that it just gets into a mess. So we've kind of stayed away from that one. But there's always new stuff coming up, and we certainly could be open to maybe something a little different or something better that comes along. But anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Yes, I can appreciate that, Councillor Watt. I can point you to a couple of municipalities that have managed this very well, and it comes from policy setting. And what you're going to respond to. You don't necessarily have to respond to every single post. What you want to do is have it so that you've got your approach, and that's really what the strategy is about. So Facebook, yes. I mean, like I said, I guess after COVID, everybody's on Facebook. So it's a great way to get your messages out there. But like I said, I think it can be handled around policy. And what you don't want is somebody becoming a rogue on your behalf. So it's much better to have a policy that says this is how the township is handling Facebook or any other social media for that matter.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, Tammy, next section.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So facilities. We did a little in terms of the township hall. This is of course before COVID, and then we did a virtual tour of the township during COVID. And we actually had come up with some recommendations around, moving people to what we call cell design. What we want to try to achieve is to have people who work together on a regular basis be sharing, this similar space or close space. Now, of course, with COVID, there's some challenges there, but what we would suggest here is really once you're looking at, back into the office and after you've reviewed the organizational structure, to look at who should be where. And one of the things is, right now you've got people, positions that are located at the township office that perhaps should be at their own facilities. And I know the manager of public works definitely is, and depending on what happens with other facilities, having people on site where they work and their staff would be beneficial. And certainly the recreation manager would be an example during the seasons, having that piece. Then you could potentially have a hoteling operation where maybe it's even in the basement, where someone is in the office and they need a spot to sit, that they can quote share that. Of course, will have to be cleaned and all that kind of stuff, but really looking at things in an operational requirement perspective. So in the condition assessment that you did not that long ago, the community centers were not included in that. We do suggest that those be undertaken, and then determine whether or not there is what the long-term implications are from a capital perspective and an operating perspective, and potentially looking at what are some alternative uses, because not all community centers could just be converted. That does need to be reviewed in a more wholesome approach. And it makes sense with our recommendations around shared services. Maybe there is a better way to utilize these facilities. I think you could probably just add this to your current condition assessment and options that you've undertaken already. And they do need to be done for your asset management plan by 2023 regardless. So we know that you had some recommendations around your public works and fire, and maybe that could, with your condition assessment, also include recreation from a longer term perspective. I guess what I would say is that you do have some sort of immediate needs that you're very aware of from both a health and safety perspective, but even a functionality perspective in fire. So really having a a strategy about where you're going to go, and in concert with your shared service reviews to make sure that you certainly can get the best bang for your buck. I will say that facilities now, as you probably all know, the costs are rising quickly, and they're having challenges with building supplies and all of those kinds of things. So it's something that should be from your long-term strategy should be brought to the forefront. And you'll see I've suggested you need to make some decisions in the very near future around those buildings. In concert with that really is around your fire master plan. It's quite outdated, and so it likely needs to be updated. I know your fire chief has done a great job in terms of reviewing what's needed, but perhaps it's time to look at that. And we did mention maybe it's a joint approach as part of the fire service review. And then possible repurposing of one of your community centers after you've looked at your the abilities for those centers to be used for other things. There's an opportunity perhaps to be especially in the summertime, there might be more uses, but I would suggest that part of the recreation master plan and ongoing from here in is really you should be tracking utilizations and true costs and that fee schedule gaps. I know you've got a couple of policies that you've reviewed recently in terms of ICE allocation and all of those things. Now you want to see what's happening with those utilization rates. It's going to be an interesting outcome from COVID. Obviously, the costs of maintaining those buildings, even from a health perspective, are going to go up. So you're going to have to make some pretty hard decisions around recreation in the near to long-term future. So I'll just pause on facilities. I know this is probably one of the areas that is maybe even keeping people up at night, but I'll open it up to questions there.
Any questions? Sheila, you have a question? No? Okay, Tom?
Yeah, not really a question. Just, yeah, you're very, very right on that, Tammy. This is a real tough section of the review here. We've gone over many things. Arenas have been on the burner for quite a while. The fire and the public's works. We know it all costs money. We've been trying to put a little bit aside stuff like that for the fire and public works building. But again, we kind of said that we were going to have to go to senior government, provincial and federal, to get some help on this because it's just too much tax burden for the cost of buildings. And you were right, costs keep going up more and more and more and more. And then it's a big thing going to the arenas. Utilization stuff like that is a great thing. We need to track that. If we were to, and I'm not saying I'm in favor of that, I never have been. I'll put that right out there, of closing one of them. Let's say the Warsaw one was on the line, stuff like that, then all the minor hockey has to move to Douro. Then that takes up all the prime time because they're not going to settle for second best. These were made for our children, not and our taxpayers, not for outsiders. So then we lose the big bucks we get from the outsiders because it's subsidized. So there's a lot of give and take on this that we really, really have to take a hard look at before any decisions are made on them.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I guess that's why I suggest, because we've done this in a few municipalities, whereby they're starting to look at alternative sources as well. So if the community is really behind these facilities, they got to recognize that the fees might increase, but looking at advertising and donation programs and those kinds of things have been quite successful in some other municipalities. So doesn't necessarily always have to fall on the taxpayer. So it really is, it will tell you if the community, how much the community is behind these when you do some of these types of approaches. So.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Watson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, my question is focused more around the space at Township Hall. and the recommendation to have the recreation manager to be located at the community center, which I support that recommendation, to make sure that the staff are in the places where they're encountering our constituents and customers. But I'm also curious about how the impact of that on just the communication, the cross-pollination between teams, and whether or not currently you feel we have the appropriate systems in place to accommodate and ensure that that cross-pollination will happen between staff and departments.
Yeah, I guess and thank you, Councillor Watson. I guess what I would say is COVID has given us some different ways of working. And so I don't ever see my team except for when we're traveling to clients, and we're not traveling to clients right now. So there are ways that you can do that where, and certainly lots of software companies use Link that they can pop up and ask questions. And I think it too is that maybe a restructuring of how the management team meets and what they're meeting about could certainly help. You'll notice that we've made some recommendations certainly on the Lean Six Sigma piece, is to get those people together and working together. So I think having a little more strategic approach to having departments together. I don't think it matters where they are. They could be in Whitehorse, Yukon, and I think they could still work together well. It's more about having the people committed to the projects and working together. That's the most important thing. So having that corporate project manager that we've been talking about, that's, to me, is that role is to make sure those people keep working together. And obviously the CAO has lots to have about that too. So.
Sure. And just to follow up, perhaps I wasn't totally clear with my question, and I apologize. I know fully that the systems exist, in my private business, fully we work remotely. So that's not a problem. The question was more so around whether or not we currently, looking back at the IT recommendations that were made, do we currently have the tools in place? Like you say, with COVID, I'm sure staff have adapted quite quickly, but do we need to be looking at further investment in those IT resources to set up those systems to enable that cross-pollination more consistently outside of COVID and, moving forward with the recommendations?
Oh, definitely, Councillor Watson. I agree with you on that. And that's really what the part of the IT strategy would also be looking at, is where are we going, across the organization between the strategic plan and the service delivery review implementation. What is it we're going to need to have in place to do that? And there's a lot more collaboration types of products around that you can use now. And as I said, workflow even is going to help the township, because by not having so much paper moving, as opposed to people being naturally in the systems and seeing the workflow will help as well. So, but absolutely, you're totally on mark there.
Thank you. Any further questions? Just one comment, Tammy, your mention of donations to get work done and have them sponsored by certain individuals. And it just brings up a thought for, we have a major need for some drainage issues at the Douro Park, the ball field. Maybe there's an opportunity there for a naming opportunity for that ball field after a certain company or whatever, if they would be prepared to provide some capital money to fund it. But I think in the days ahead, there's going to be all kinds of need to look at other ways of raising capital for projects that need to be done.
Yes, absolutely, Deputy Mayor. I agree with you. And you could be looking at 3P operations where your public-private partnerships are in place as well. Yeah, and there are many municipalities that have done this naming kind of approach. I would suggest that you have a naming policy in place, but definitely, and obviously, you know, that's why I also suggested a reserve policy, because those types of things you do want to be transparent as to where they've been identified for specific purposes. So you want to be able to have those types of reserves in place as well.
Thank you. Okay, next section, Tammy, if you wish to proceed.
Okay, thank you. And I'm almost done, I promise. Asset management, really, this is more of a sum up of a bunch of stuff we've already talked about. So the project manager for asset management, we talked about already. But I'd also highlight, that you want to make sure that whatever's happening on the Edwards Pit, of course, the public works manager is quite obviously going to be quite involved, but he's also got a department to run. So making sure that everybody's talking to each other really is what you want to achieve there. And I know you've got a couple of consultants, so that's going to be a large project over a period of time if should you decide to proceed on that. As we mentioned, OREG 58817 requires that all municipalities in Ontario have a asset management plan for core assets by 2021 and all the remaining assets in 2023. So you do have, you know, some funding with the Public Sector Digest as a lead. And I think there may be some additional things coming down the pipe. We'll have to see. You know, making sure everybody's involved in this process is going to be very important. And time, it's going to take internal costs, internal time as well. Obviously, Public Works is will be the most intense. And that leads us to our next recommendation, that as part of the implementation of this plan is to create that asset management team. And I would actually suggest that maybe one councillor might want to be on this team as well. Asset management is responsibility of council. Anything that's regulated, of course, is in your purview, and the policy set last year requires that council also be involved. So, but in terms of the day-to-day practices, we want to make sure that they're all documented. This asset management is not a once a year or year-end exercise that finance tries to figure out how much money is spent. This is all about changing daily practices and capturing life cycle costs throughout the process. In the report, and I did not put it up on the PowerPoint, but in the report, we did provide you with a decision tree around your gravel situation. So we know from the consultations and reading documentation that this has obviously been one of the areas of concern for council for many years now, but certainly elevated in the last couple. We did a high level calculation that gravel conversion is about $11 to $22 million, depending on the current state of the particular roadway. You will also see the model that Four Roads Management did on behalf of WSCS that says the payback on gravel conversion is at about 12 years. So obviously $11 million is not something you're going to be spending tomorrow, but a strategy on the, you know, your most traveled or most problematic areas perhaps is a way to start to look at potential for conversion, and with the idea that you do have you know, payback in about 12 years. So that's in the detail of the report. So hopefully you got a chance to read that. And then we'll have to do a new roads needs study next year. And I would suggest that, and we would suggest that some of the requirements be updated to meet all of the elements of the inventory manual. And so, and the reason we say that is that the two reports, one being your asset management plan and one being your roads needs studies, don't necessarily tell you the same things. And it's primarily because one is based on age, one's based on certain elements of condition, but maybe not all. So we would suggest expanding that roads needs study elements a little to meet those requirements. And then of course, as part of your, and I know I don't even need to tell you this, you've been had lots of recommendations around the Edwards pit. What we're most concerned about, and I know it was challenging, was around how much internal costs are going to be required to manage that Edwards pit. So some of these are, and I'm sure that the Edwards pit is actually long term. We didn't, because you've got consultants dealing with that, we were really more concerned with the internal processes around that. So this is a long-term project. You got your asset management plan, of course, it's definitely required shortly. I would suggest you need to get some training, council as well as staff, so that everybody understands what's required of them in these requirements. And of course, reviewing your service levels over time is also part of your asset management plan requirements. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Deputy Mayor. And
thank you. Any questions about that? That's this whole subject is going to be a big issue in the weeks and months ahead. Okay, Tammy, do you wish to sum up here?
Yes, so I do for sure. I did actually add one last slide, which I know was not on I will send it out. And in the report, what we have done is we have identified 3 types of costs, as well as potential savings or cost avoidance. So you will see that there is some investment that we have recommended. Some of these, even these external costs, and by the way, this is by every single recommendation in the report. Some of the costs, such as probably the largest external costs, obviously, are around the technology investment, which I believe some of the modernization money could potentially be used for. And I understand there may be an announcement around implementation for next year. So hopefully you'll have some funding opportunities there. The organizational change, this, by the way, includes having the external corporate project manager, which was at $300,000. And this is over a 3-year period. Savings that we saw just from the internal savings that we would generate, within the 3-year period, it's about $600,000. And so then we, based on the recommendations, and I should mention, governance also includes if you went out for some consulting services around shared services. So those are all included in those. And so over a 10-year period, we believe that you'll have a savings of about 5.6 million. I also provided in the report the payback time frame for each recommendation in the report. I'm more than happy to address if anybody has any particular questions. I know that you all had the report sent out to you earlier, but you didn't have a lot of time to review the details. So if there's any specific questions around any of the costing, I'd be more than happy to talk to you about that.
Okay, any questions from anyone? Okay, so Tammy, is that it, or before we go into caucus?
Yep, that's basically it. Just the next steps is obviously posting the report on your site, we have to do an abstract and then put that final report. So that's the next stages.
Thank you very much. The thoroughness of your report has been noted big time. It's there's a lot of detail we've covered, and we need I'm sure, a bit more time to comprehend what you're exactly saying, but some of the information here is very, very thorough. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we need to have some kind of resolution here, and Crystal, perhaps you can help us with a resolution. I know, I think certainly we agree with Mayor Jones before he left about some kind of terms of reference that we need to develop in a proper moving forward position. So perhaps, Crystal, have you got a sample resolution that we could perhaps pass at this stage? Agree to support the findings in principle or something to that effect? Crystal, can you go ahead?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Through you, there was a recommended resolution that was sent out last week. I have, after the discussion that Mayor Jones had with council before he left the meeting, I did kind of change mine a little bit. So if it's okay with you, I will just read the revised recommended resolution.
Sure.
So that the final draft service delivery report dated August 24th, 2020 be received and approved, and the following actions be approved. That a service delivery implementation committee terms of reference be approved for council to volunteer once we see those terms of reference and to work with the management team to prepare an implementation plan. That an implementation plan be presented to council for review and approval. That the draft service delivery report be sent to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing no later than August 31st, 2020, as per the agreement for Municipal Modernization Funding Program, and that the final service delivery and organizational report be posted on the township website no later than September 18th, 2020, as per the agreement for Municipal Modernization Funding Program.
Okay, thank you, Crystal. That section there that requires a copy to go to the province, that's to meet the funding that they're paying for this efficiency.
Correct.
Okay.
And the
Any
same with the
comments?
posting on the website.
Any comments from council? Landsman? Go ahead. You're muted.
Thank you. Yes, I just have a question with regard to the August 31 date. Is that the date that it must be received by? Because that only leaves a week to, for council to take a look at it and make any changes or suggestions or discussion.
Through you, Mr. Chair, can I call on Tammy or Martina? I'm not as familiar with this program as they are.
Sure. My understanding, actually, there was an extension regardless, but my understanding is that it's the interim report that had to be posted. So I'll turn it over to Martina because you guys are the ones that signed the agreement.
Go ahead, Martina.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. We have been in contact with our municipal rep. So they do know that the presentation was coming to council today, so that they know that the documents will be submitted online in the coming days once council receives the draft report today.
Okay, so perhaps should we change the wording to the interim report in the resolution?
I believe it's the draft final report that they would like to see.
Sure.
So
okay.
It's the final report that needs to be posted in September.
Sure. Well, the draft final would do it. Okay, any further questions of council? Heather, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Clerk, if you could just once again repeat the first bullet point around the terms of reference. I think that's probably the biggest change from the draft motion that was sent to us, and I just want to make sure that I'm clear on that.
Yes.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair. So the first part stayed the same, but that a service delivery implementation committee terms of reference be prepared for council to, once they see it, be able to volunteer to be on this committee and to work with the management team to prepare an implementation plan.
You okay, Sheila?
Yes, I'm just so I'm clear, because that was going to be my question as well. The Service Delivery Review Implementation Committee, or whatever it's called, is that all of council?
Not necessarily. I would think it would be a representative of council and selected senior staff. Crystal, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the idea of having a terms of reference for this committee will help council members to decide if they want to be part of this committee once they know what they will be tasked with doing. And I think that's the same with the managers. I would hope that all managers would be interested in working on the implementation plan. However, we do need to see those terms of reference so we know what this committee will do. And then what will happen is once council and managers get to see a terms of reference, they will be able to volunteer, and a bylaw will come back to council to form a proper service delivery implementation committee by bylaw.
Just one other point too, anything that's recommended by this committee would have to come back to council for approval at some point, or at various points, because there's going to be various recommendations along the way, I would assume.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Watt?
I'm not sure who wants to answer this one, whether it's Tammy or Martina or Crystal, whatever. And it would just come up when we had our one there last time, Carl, with our committee, and there was a couple of points that were made that, you know, that questions on whether we would actually proceed with a certain thing, you know, well, you know, there was some question on it. Well, I think you maybe brought it up today with the manager or the staffing for the community center, stuff like that. If we were to decide to change that a little bit, is this, once we send it to the province, is this in stone, or do we have still the opportunity to tweak things a little bit differently if we see it necessary?
Martina, do you want to start that, or Tammy, whatever?
I see Martina talking, but I'm not sure if she's.
You're muted, Martina. Go ahead. You're still muted.
How about now?
Now you're good now.
Okay, I apologize. There's a button on my headphones and I must have pressed it by accident.
Okay.
So through you, these are recommendations that I believe Tammy is proposing, and so they're not set in stone. So it would be up to the implementation committee and council on how they wanted to progress through those recommendations and the timelines and the budget commitments. And Tammy, you may want to add to that as well.
Yes, I mean, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So yes, we have made our recommendations, and the reason we also suggested an implementation committee is for the township to take those recommendations. Some of them you may disagree with, some of them you might want to change slightly. That to me is certainly up to the township on how they proceed. To me, it's no different than any other consulting recommendations. So you might take 74 and accept 70 or 22. It's totally up to the township how they want to proceed.
Thank you, Tammy.
Yep. No, thank you very much. And sorry to butt in there, Carl, but that's exactly kind of what I wanted to know. And not that I appreciate everything you've done. There's like 74 good recommendations there. It's just like you just said, budget wise and time wise and stuff. But, you know, some of these may take even longer than we expect, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there a mover and a seconder? Heather, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I will move the recommendation as read by the clerk earlier.
Thank you. And Sheila is seconder. And just comment here, I wonder, Crystal, if you could email out that final resolution, a copy to all councillors, please. Okay, any further questions or comments? Sheila?
Yes, to Tammy, if I may. If you could forward us a copy of the final slide in your presentation, which is not in ours, that would be great.
Yes, I had intended to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any further comments? Okay, all in favor, show of hands. Okay, it is carried. Anyone against? Seeing none, the motion is carried. Madam Clerk? Okay, I guess that's pretty well finalizes the first part of the presentation. Crystal, you'll need some time to get the meeting set up for the caucus section. And I'm going to recommend maybe a 10-minute break to grab a bite from the fridge or whatever, if that would be appropriate. So can we meet back at 12:35? Crystal, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, would it be okay at this time if we are going to take a break now for the time that you say, if you could just, or I could just note that I will be taking the live streaming off of YouTube and the recording will be stopped, just so that the public is aware of that at this time.
Sure. You need a resolution for that?
I don't, but I don't think we do. We can if we want,
Okay.
but
So noted, and let the minutes record that we are going through that process. So for the general public, the presentation there, anyone that wishes to relook at it, it will be available, I think, almost immediately on the website. And if there's any questions, certainly we can ask them. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a technical question through to the clerk. So when we return to this meeting for closed session, are we coming back to the same link or, okay, thank you.
The same link, and Crystal will be excluding the people that won't be on the part of the meeting. Councillor Watt?
No, I was just going to ask that. I think last time we had a caucus, one of Angela's, or I think Angela was our clerk or whatever, or temporary clerk. Is that the same thing this time, or how's that working? Because I don't know how Crystal knows how to come back on when we're done.
That's okay. Through you, Mr. Chair, Martina and I will be staying in for this portion of the meeting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you guys, so when you take your break, you can just mute yourself. I'll actually mute you as well. Maybe hide your camera so that if you need to leave the room or whatnot, and then we'll come back at the time that Deputy Mayor Moher gives us, and we can return on the same screen, and we will be stopping live streaming, stopping the recording, and those not to be in attendance will have left.
Okay, so 12:35, grab a bite and whatever, and we'll be back at it. Tammy, how long ballpark would it be for the second portion?
I think it shouldn't be more than about half an hour.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. And we'll talk again in 12:35.
Thank you.
Thank you.